So, hello everybody. This is the third episode of the Ascension TV, Age of Gaia, with Kiara Windrider. And what I'd like to share in this episode is the journey of someone that we have known as Jesus in Western civilization, someone who has shaped the Western paradigm to a large extent. Um, and it's an exploration of how that story continues. Um, there are manuscripts that have been surfacing across the world now from many different traditions, from Roman times, from early Christian manuscripts in the Malabar coast of India, from Buddhist and Hindu scriptures, um, many eyewitness accounts that flesh out the story that we've been told so far, which is centered around basically 3 years of his life that we know from the New Testament. What if you what if we knew that there's so much more to this? What if we understood who the players in the story actually were, what their life stories were about, what they were trying to actually convey to people around them? So there's an Eastern story to Jesus, which I've been tracking for the past 10 years, and which is so fascinating to me. And um, Jesus is someone that has inspired me, that I've had various kinds of relationships with, from first experiencing him as a teacher, as a savior, to then really understanding what his message was about, that he was a brother, that he was an example, that he was someone who modeled something that any of us and all of us could experience directly for ourselves. This is what to me is the good news. Um, and it's something that has been um, overcome by elements within um, the Christian church, which had a certain agenda. Even one of the founders of Christianity had a certain agenda that had to do with fitting more into the Roman culture and mythology than um, narrating the truth of what Jesus himself was teaching. So, as part of this story, um, I've been researching and writing about um, Isa, as Jesus is known in India, Isa's journeys in India, in Kashmir, along the Malabar coast, across to Sri Lanka, up to Nepal. His um, monastic studies in Jagannath Puri. His meeting with Mary Magdalene. Who was she? How did they meet? Where did they meet? Now, what happened afterwards? Um, his um, the time that he spent in Kashmir, what he learned, his own um, training with the yogic master Chaitanya, who was from an immortal lineage, or rather, he was from a lineage of immortals, going back to Goraknath, and others. So much of this story has been covered up and hidden, destroyed, defaced, um, locked up, even locked up inside the Vatican. Um, Many of these ancient manuscripts were burnt, um, along with those who followed these teachings. And the time has come finally when the collective is ready for this. And even up to 10 years ago, um, we weren't ready to understand the full significance of the story. Um, I look at the paradigm that we've created based on the Western Christian model of the Jesus story. Some of it has to do with our relationship with the earth, the interpretation of Genesis, where we are told that man has been given dominion over the earth, so go and do what you wish, conquer, sterilize, rape, and pillage. The earth belongs to you. Contrast that with the indigenous tradition, like Chief Seattle says, the earth does not belong to you, you belong to the earth. What if that paradigm could be reversed? What if we could understand truly what it means to be on this earth as participants in this evolutionary journey, rather than as conquerors, rather than as being the top of the ladder of creation? We realize that we are holographic aspects of all creation, all life, that we are divine. And this is another paradigm shift, from seeing ourselves as somehow less than God or separate from God. We're seeing that God exists in all things and within, as above, so below, as within, so without. This is the alchemical tradition. So this paradigm shift is a paradigm shift that we are now ready for as we prepare to create new worlds. We cannot understand this paradigm shift outside of this perspective of becoming co-creators for the new earth and what that means. So if you understand that we're going through this magnetic reversal, as we spoke about in the last couple episodes, that we are preparing for soul infusion, that we are preparing to actually move from a species that's governed only through the mind to a species that's governed through the heart, through the soul, through multidimensional awareness of who we are. That changes everything. And so I'd like to rephrase the story of Jesus in a way that it speaks to us in this way that we can actually shift paradigms. Because how we perceive truth is what creates reality for us. Truth does not exist as an independent structure out there. It's our relationship with what we call truth. And remember that facts are not necessarily truth. In fact, there's a beautiful Ojibwe saying that says, never confuse truth with facts. Truth is something that you create for yourself as you interpret facts, as you synthesize the big picture for yourself. And it can only be your own journey. It cannot be something someone else projects onto you, someone else distills for you. It has to be your own journey of exploration, of discovery, and of awareness. So this story that I wish to share with you is a story of discovery. And as I came to understand the story for myself, I can only offer this as a perspective that those who are choosing to listen to the voice of their soul and begin to understand for themselves, whichever way you choose to. There's no one interpretation. So what I'd like to do is maybe just summarize what this story is about. And then maybe later we can go back and look at different aspects of this. I will say that my trilogy, the Isa trilogy, I call it, starting with Isa, son of the sun, then Miran, daughter of the moon, Elmira, child of the stars, all available on Amazon. They go into the story as a fiction. Um, so that becomes easier to relate to aspects that you choose to relate with and leave out what you don't. Also, it makes it more fun and interesting and dramatic and readable. So to summarize this quickly, um, the Jews did not rise up in isolation from the rest of the world. There was a time going back to Abraham and his son Israel. I guess he was previously known as Jacob, and he became Israel. First of all, Abraham has roots going all the way out and back to the Vedas. There's a relationship between Brahma and Abraham, Sarah and Saraswati, and we can continue doing this with many of the biblical patriarchs, Noah, and Nu, and Manu, um, and so on. I mean, this is something that you can even look at historical places and see correspondences between places in Palestine, places in Kashmir and Afghanistan. There's conjectures that Kashmir was the promised land that Moses was trying to lead his people to. So what I'm trying to say is that nothing is isolated in history. And if we go back in time, through a series of wars and displacements, the 10 so-called lost tribes of Israel became displaced and relocated in the Himalayan regions of Afghanistan, Kashmir, in that part of India. And 2,000 years ago, this land, Kashmir, was primarily Jewish, not Jewish in the way we know today. They knew themselves, they called themselves the Bani Israel, the children of Israel. They were the 10 lost tribes. They didn't see themselves as lost, but they referred to themselves as the children of Israel. And they recognized that this was the promised land that Moses was trying to lead his people into. In fact, there's a tomb of Moses in northern Kashmir, just north of Srinagar. And this is well known to the local people. There's a tomb of Joseph, there's a tomb of Mary, and there's even a tomb of Jesus in the heart of Srinagar. We'll get to all this later. And, people, please feel free to leave questions in the comment boxes. I don't know how this is structured. I don't know if it's different from YouTube. I guess we'll all figure it out together. So Esau's father was a ruler in the kingdom of Kush. His mother was the co-ruler. And that lineage was a mix of Bani Israel with tribes that had come down from the north, from the Caucasus regions, from the Ural Mountains in Ukraine. So this was the Tocharian tribes, the Sakyas, the Munis, which also were a parallel lineage, which gave rise to the birth of the one that we today know as Siddhartha or Buddha. So they were a parallel lineage. And there was a prophecy in the Buddhist lineage that 500 years after the death of the Buddha, that the next bodhisattva would arise. It went along with the prophecy that the next Maitreya was coming. In those days, they referred to the same thing, although they've diverged. In the Jewish tradition, then, that became the Messiah. And it was about reuniting the Jewish tribes, the Hebrew tribes. In the Buddhist tradition, was bringing back the heart of the Buddhist teachings, which were about compassion and divinity. So that's how the story begins, two parallel lineages, and the recognition that the next bodhisattva was due, the next Maitreya was due. And so, as often happens even today, the oracles go looking for the reincarnation of their Lama when they know that the timing is right. So they followed the star. The star led them all the way to Palestine, to Bethlehem. They found Isa, um, the son of um, what we call Joseph and Mary, who were known in those days as um, Meghavahana and Amritaprabha. So this is the Bani Israel equivalent. So they had sons, twins, Isa and Thomas. And so the oracles came looking for the reincarnation. They discovered that Isa is the one. They put him through a series of tests shortly after his birth, just like they do today, and brought back the news that, yes, he's here. And so that created a link already between the monasteries and um, the religious institutions in India, Nepal, in Tibet and Ladakh, in the Bani Israel um, tribes in Kashmir, with what was known in Palestine. Back in Palestine, the birth was announced, but it was announced with a great deal of it came with a great deal of fear because the king at that time, Herod the Great, was also aware of these prophecies, but took this as a threat to his own power and basically wanted to get rid of him. So they escaped. They went to Egypt. They went to Alexandria. They lived amongst the Essene communities for a while, which were also linked with the Buddhist uh, communities after Ashoka the Great. So if you trace history, there's a lot of links between the Theravada tradition, which was known as the Therapeutes in one tradition, which became the Essenes in another tradition, which then became the healers of that time that Isa and his family ended up spending time with maybe the first 5 or 6 years of Isa's life. Then they came back into Palestine, lived there for a while. The next thing we know is that he is arguing with a bunch of temple priests at the age of 12. And the priests are amazed at his wisdom, which is not so amazing because this wisdom comes from the East. It's a recognition of the God within. It's a recognition that pervades so many different traditions of that time. But the Jewish tradition of that time was averse to this because they had this idea of God being separate from man. There's a dualistic relationship. God's out there, man's out here. There's all kind of rules and regulations and dogmas and sacrifices that are the only way that humanity can be saved. This later became the dogma, the scriptural dogma around salvation, that Jesus had to die on the cross and be resurrected in order for sins to be, um, what's the word, to be released, revolved, resolved. So this is the culture that Isa was born into. And he was in between because of his parents' connection with um, elders in the East, but also with the times. So when he was arguing in the temple, um, it was very natural for him to speak his truth. They were amazed that he was revealing a wisdom that even the priests themselves were not aware of. So it became a little bit of a problem because people are starting to now question who he was. How come he knows all these things and what do you do about it? That was the moment also that he had to leave and go back. Well, not going back for him because he was born in Palestine, but going back for the family. So they left, spent time in Persia along the way, where Isa was introduced to the court astrologers, learned about the Zoroastrian tradition, which had to do with duality as well. Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, the forces of light and darkness, but a slightly different form of duality. Um, Continuing on later, going to spend time in Takshila amongst the learning centers, which is now Pakistan, Afghanistan, and continuing down into the Sindh, very connected with Jain culture, when the lineage of Mahavir, who existed around the same time as Buddha. Then continuing down to the Malabar coast of Kerala, Goa, and this is where the Bani Israel tribes had also settled. Continuing down across the south to Sri Lanka, where there were Mahayana Buddhist communities, going back up to kingdom of Magadha, to the temple of Jagannath Puri, where he became a monk for a period of years, maybe 2 or 3 years. This is where he met one known as Marie of Magadha, that later became known as Mary of Magdalene. The story continues. Later, after he graduated from his studies, he disagreed with a lot of what the Brahmins were teaching. He disagreed with the idea that only Brahmins, only men were allowed to receive these teachings. So he started teaching common people and was persecuted for it. He was slated to be assassinated. He found out, he escaped, he went off he was in Varanasi at the time, he went off to Kapilavastu in Nepal, where he studied the Theravada Buddhist teachings for a period of time. So by now, he's really encountered so many different traditions of that time and beginning to learn how to synthesize, to ask the right questions, to begin to experience some of these teachings directly. And that's when he became ready to meet his primary teacher at that time, Chaitanya. So on his way up to Kashmir, Chaitanya showed up. And that's another story, became his primary teacher. So most of his yogic abilities, his ability to merge the 5 bodies, his ability to access the Anandamaya Kosha, the body of light, to use that for healing, for manifesting, for guidance, for the right use of power. All of that came from his connection with Chaitanya and the training that he went through to build the light body. So then he goes back to Kashmir, reunites with his family there. At a certain point, together they go back to Palestine. And that's what we know of as the ministry of Jesus, the 3 years that are known in the New Testament. Culminating with the crucifixion. And again, here we diverge, because in the Christian tradition of the West, he's crucified, he dies, he's buried. and then is finally resurrected. In the Christian tradition of the East, which includes Buddhist, Hindu, early Christian, and even later Islamic traditions, the crucifixion was actually more of a ruse to rescue him from the priests who wanted to kill him. So the appearance of death was actually simulated by partly his own yogic um, abilities, and partly remember when the soldier Longinus, the centurion, raises a sponge up to his lips containing vinegar. It also contains opioids, including belladonna, which simulates the appearance of death. So he's hanging on the cross. The soldiers come to break his legs. They see that he's already dead, appears to be. He's taken down. And inside the sepulchre, the tomb that he's placed into, wrapped up in the shroud containing healing herbs, Essene healers sit with him through the night. Next morning, he's awakened from his induced trance. He's weak, he's wounded, but he's alive. Takes him a while to recover. He gathers his disciples together. 40 days later, he's heading back east, along with many of his disciples, back to Kashmir. Meanwhile, Mary of Magadha, they have a child. She's pregnant with his child. They move up to France. She founds the Cathar tradition, which is a Gnostic tradition that understood that divinity is something that can be experienced within. Understood the principles of alchemy as within, so without, as above, so below. It's a holographic recognition that we are gods, that God is within us. I and the Father are one. So all these things that Jesus was simply hinting at were real for many of his disciples who were able to understand, and for the Gnostics. And of course, that's why they were so heavily persecuted by the church at that time, because it was too threatening for this message to be understood. So at that point, Isa goes back. I'll call him Isa from here on out because that's how he was known in Kashmir. Goes back out to Kashmir, marries a Kashmiri princess. She is born and bred in a neighboring kingdom, Pahalgam. They have a family together, at least 2 sons, and perhaps a daughter. And that story continues. So it leads into the story of the Holy Grail. As the sons follow their father up into England at a certain point, remain there, and create a new lineage, along with Sarah, his daughter, through Mary of Magadha. So the story continues in many directions. There's even a lineage that's still held by the caretakers of the tomb of Isa in Srinagar, going back 60 generations to Isa and Iran, and one of their sons, Elikim. So this is a living lineage. It's a living lineage in Kashmir. It's a living lineage which created the Merovingian, and eventually the so-called blue bloods that got corrupted at a certain point. There was a inflection point with King Arthur that had it gone a different way, would have created a different timeline. So this is the largest story of Isa that that I've been following, piecing together from various manuscripts, source manuscripts, as well as books that have been written by current authors, like Holger Kirsten, like Suzanne Olson, like Vida Hussein, like Alan Jacobs, like Faber Myers. No, what's the name? Faber. Sorry, it's a double name which I can't remember at the moment. There's manuscripts by eyewitness accounts amongst the Romans. There's manuscripts that have been hidden inside the Vatican that have been uncovered by researchers such as Barry Page. Um, much of this has been secret information up to a certain point, up to a certain time. And now it's time for the truth, the rest of the truth, to be uncovered. And as I said earlier, what is truth? It's not a collection of facts. It's what allows you to, allows each person, allows each one of us to experience a paradigm shift, to make a paradigm shift about who we are, about our status on this earth. Are we here to be um, dominators and tyrants, controllers and takers? Or are we here to join consciously with a single living web of life, to experience our role within this web of life and to fulfill that role? Are we here to worship a God outside of us who exists only outside of time and space, and we are the creation? Or are we, is it time now to recognize that we are um, multidimensional beings, that we are also that aspect of divinity from beyond time and space, here and now, that the Great Mother permeates all things and is within all things as much as she is beyond all things. So it's easier for me here to talk about the Great Mother because the idea of the Father has become so patriarchal and so um, distant and so separate that it's easier for me to experience that aspect as the Divine Mother, which is what how she is known in much of India, in the Kashmiri tradition, in Kashmir Shaivism, um, as Shakti, the living goddess that moves through all things, who's the face of all creation, and who's our own reflection as we recognize that aspect of us and as we surrender to that living force moving through us. So this is the new paradigm that I experience as truth. And so this is what I wish to just simply um, offer as a perspective on truth. As Pontius Pilate said, what is truth? And that's up to each of us to answer in the best way we can, as long as we are following the truth of our hearts, as long as we're following, like Carlos Castaneda says, the path with the heart. We're following that truth. So this is my path with heart. And as part of this Age of Gaia series, it's about understanding the living consciousness of the earth, which you're not separate from. It's a new paradigm of change, of shift, of awakening. And as we change and transform, our stories have to change and transform. As our stories change and transform, we end up changing and transforming. So yeah, so this is the story perspective that I'd like to share at the moment. So this is the first of the trilogy, Isa, Son of the Sun, followed by Nijan, Daughter of the Moon, and Elmira, Child of the Stars. So as I said, this is a fictional, no, I write it as fiction. It's not fictional necessarily. Account of this new story of Isa, or Jesus. And in previous episodes, I'd also mentioned a couple other books, which I'd like to refer to again. Gaia Luminous. It's tricky on a virtual screen. And then Homo Luminous. So this has to do with going beyond the personal story into the planetary story, Gaia Luminous. And Homo Luminous is about the new human, the divine human species that's emerging. And I do believe, I do recognize that our time now, as we enter into the next species, is exactly what Isa was referring to. The kingdom of God is within you. The same things that I do, you can all do as I go to the Father. And it's the time now that these higher realms of consciousness, this multidimensional presence that we are, can now embody and anchor through these physical avatars that we identify with. And awaken who we are to divine consciousness. So thank you once again for joining me here on this episode. The story continues. Thank you.